Do we want to collect data in a progressive way, or do we want to ask at certain points and take a certain risk? And maybe not everyone will lock in, but yeah, first party data gets obviously more valuable.
Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of the creative effectiveness ad tech platform Automated Creative, and this is a podcast about the future of data-driven marketing. Every week or so, I have the pleasure and the privilege of speaking to one of our industry's leaders, and this week is no different. I'm on a call with Constantin Hourmouzis, who is Senior Manager Data-Driven Marketing at PwC. So Constantin, for anyone who doesn't know who you are and what you do, could you give us a bit of background?
Hey, Tom. First of all, thanks for having me on your show, and I'm excited about this conversation. My name is Constantin Hourmouzis, and I've been part of the PwC customer transformation practice, focusing on data-driven marketing. I've been, I think, 11 years now in marketing. I spent 5 years in industry in the B2B business, and then 6 years now in consulting. And mainly I help organizations to effectively engage with their customers, and either by leveraging innovation or shaping the business organization, optimizing processes, helping them to implement technologies, and always from a human-led tech-powered perspective. And I think if I break it down to what really drives me day to day, I think it's curiosity and meaningful connections, and to build something. And happy to be on the show.
So are you a experienced person, or are you a bookworm? Do you have a marketing book, or do you have a pile of marketing books that you're plowing through, or is there a favorite that stands out for you?
Great question. I mean, there are a few potentially good marketing books to recommend. If I have to choose one which really had an impact with me, and it's not directly a marketing book, but I can highly recommend it. It's from Ray Dalio, the hedge fund manager and founder of Bridgewater Associates. And he wrote a book which is called Principles for Life and Work. And he speaks about how to be a successful entrepreneur, and he gives certain, as the name says, principles to manage that.
So help me understand, what are the three things that you took away from that book?
I think to nail it down, the first point he's giving is to learn from mistake and try and fail. And I think this really resonates with marketing. It's about piloting things. It's about building hypotheses, taking hypotheses from data, and be open about failure and create a culture of respectful disagreement. And I think this brings out the best, I think, in any team, but I think this specifically sticks to marketing. And I think it's important to somehow carrying your failures like medals and be very open what worked and didn't work, and learn to improve. And I think that you can relate this to a lot of, I think, different aspects of life, but I think it has quite a meaning to the agile marketing world. The second point, which I really took away, is he speaks about how to build up a systematic decision-making process. And again, I think in marketing, this is very much related to today's data and the hypothesis. And I think it's important to somehow have a process to scale and test and learn and build up new use cases. And he's also talking about how to make this decision, how to come up. So I think it's a great book.
And what was your third point? I think we've done two there.
No, how to make a decision. I think the first one is building the processes, really building the engine, how to come up to the decision-making process. And the third point is then how to make and come to these decisions. And he's talking about being very transparent, creating a culture of I think he's calling it culture of meritocracy, to really bring out the best of the team and be open with what's working and what not. Yeah, and I think that's great points.
I think what really stuck with me from that book is talking about like the radical candor, or the radical transparency, I think he calls it. I mean, that book's about 5-6 years old, as I think, maybe, and maybe even older. I might have got that wrong, but he talks about recording every single meeting and making the content of every single meeting available for everyone in the business within reason. I think there was some caveat about, I don't know, financials or something, but it's like invite as few people as possible to a meeting and say, look, here's the recording. If you want to hear it, it's all there. It's all recorded. And we've tried to do that at Automated Creative. We use things like Otter AI, and I certainly record all of my calls anyway, and they're all available. But I'm curious to know if you've tried any of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's a big point he's making, but also he speaks about being very transparent on the way you make decisions and being very open. And I think the way, as you mentioned, is being radical and being open about this decision and share it with the audience. And I think in most cases, it's fair if you have only a certain or given information and you being very open to the audience and say, those are my factors where my decision is based, and I do not have all the necessary information. But I think this transparent openness can really create a great culture and somehow get the people on board. Yeah.
So what is your best bit of data-driven marketing advice, the bit of advice that you find yourself giving to most people?
I think one point which really struck with me is, and which really separates, I think, market leaders from laggards in that sense, is that companies are carefully thinking about what's their data value proposition. And what I mean by that is that some company has really managed to build an ecosystem where people want to stay and give certain data and information. And some companies have really managed to build out a flywheel of that. And there are some laggards which have no clear understanding where they have possibilities to collect data. And let me give you a few examples on that, what companies can do to somehow create a systematic approach and think about how to get more data and more consents, because there are multiple ways companies can do this. And I think one simple way would be you give economic rewards to your clients, or you create certain exclusivity or community. You share information in exchange for data, or you do personalization either on product, service, or communication level. Or social responsibility, I think, is a huge driver, or even amusement can be. And there are so many possibilities where company have the option to create this value proposition and to really systematically review the touch points and create this value proposition to make it effortless for people to step in and love to stay and think about where to collect data progressively. And I think that's a huge advice I would give, and to do this process carefully. Because at the end, and that's my last point, and I pause on that, because at the end, it's the data and as well the consents which makes you able to really build a flywheel and build a data-driven marketing engine.
So I'm a bit embarrassed to say this, but a data value proposition isn't a phrase that I've come across, and it actually makes a lot of sense. Obviously, value propositions very common, and data very common. It kind of makes sense squished together. So hopefully it doesn't explaining too much. But in short, it kind of feels like, what is the consumer going to get in return for giving you, the business, their data? Is it as simple as that, or is there a wider nuance to what a data value proposition is? Exactly.
And it can be, economic rewards. I think it's an easy example. We have retailers which created a lot of great apps, and they collecting your email address, your phone number. They know when you buy stuff, where you buy it. And I think it's just super valuable data to build your marketing engine. Or companies create certain communities around products and services where people really love to enter and stay. And it's easy for some companies to derive affinities of that and then use this to upsell and cross-sell. And there are so many other examples which, you can build to create this value proposition in a systematic way.
I'm guessing here a little bit, but is there more of a trend that you're seeing towards brands being very specific and front-footed about their data value proposition, or is it still like, oh, give us your email address, and the consumer learns what their data value proposition is over time? Or is this actually being used as like a conversion tool now, where you're very upfront, like you will specifically get this in return for this?
I mean, there's different angles to look at the topic. And I think some companies I've seen who have done their homework and went really touch point by touch point just to understand what are we actually collecting, where do we have missed opportunity, either from a business perspective or where do we lack the architecture. So in some cases, companies collect data but not really utilizing it to some extent. So you can either go from a touch point to touch point way, or as you mentioned, you take this to a more strategic, on a more strategic view and say, what can we really offer? And do we actually, how aggressive or defensive do we want to use data? Do we want to collect data in a progressive way, or do we want to ask at certain points and take a certain risk? And maybe not everyone will lock in, but the amount of data we're getting is so valuable, so we want to take this risk. And I think that's not an easy decision at some of the touch points. But yeah, I agree. I mean, that it's a conversation companies having more and more. I mean, as first party data gets obviously more valuable.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with Madfest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from Madfest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com.
So we're going to talk now about your shiny new object, which is customer data platforms, CDPs as they're known. So not the newest thing in the world, but I'm curious to know why you've chosen customer data platforms as your shiny new object.
Yeah, and I agree, Tom. It's definitely not a new topic in that sense, but I think it's very shiny if you implement and do it right. And to give you just a quick elaboration of what a CDP is doing, I think it's a widely known tool which is able to collect data from multiple touch points, create an ID and get an understanding of your customer across different systems. Build an audience and then being able to activate and work on that. And the promise of the CDP obviously is to increase marketing efficiency or have a positive impact on sales and service. And I think if you look at Gartner, they actually put it at the bottom of the hype cycle right now. And I think there are a couple of reasons for it. But I think if you do it in the right way, if you set the implementation right, the operating model right, the governance right, it can be very, very shiny and impactful. And I think there are a lot of foundational steps which have to be done either before or during the selection process. And let me just name a few of them. And I think the first one is obviously related to the advice I just gave. I think some companies they implement the CDP and have not done their homework on the data value proposition. And I think it's of course necessary to have a certain amount of data and a certain amount of consent to work with that. I think that will be potentially my point number one. And second point is to have an early understanding on the governance of the tool. Should it be more related to IT or CRM or e-commerce? And who are the people who are really driving and owning the tool? And having this, having a certain team and stakeholder group from the beginning. And I think it's also important to include data protection to be sure on those aspects. And then the third point is how to select the technology. And I think there are two very different approaches to take the CDP topic. Either you take a packaged or out of the box CDP, which is, I think nowadays over 170 vendor out there, and then another big trend is building a composable CDP, which means you're taking your existing data warehouse and take a lot of different tools and build up your own solution. I think that's a careful evaluation you should do in this topic, of course, dependent on your capabilities, on your time to market requirements, and the decision if you really can build a competitive edge out of that. So I think that's something which companies should really carefully look about. And then there's the target operating model, right? I think a tool which is able to potentially tear down data silos from a technical perspective, also needs to tear down some of the organizational silos organizations having. And I think that's mainly where big implementation, either being successful or failing, is getting the business processes right around it. And I think if you consider those factors, it can be a very, very shiny object.
So can you describe a transformative experience for one of your clients that they had as a result of implementing a CDP in the way that you suggest?
Yeah, I think what we have seen, I mean, two big value drivers we've been building or leveraged. It's either on the efficiency side and creating more returns on the activation to the consumer, or leveraging a more organizational efficiency, right? There are companies where it takes 4 to 5 days to request audiences, and you need to do a lot of SQL and manual work to get an understanding of your audiences and KPIs. And I think that's where CDPs really can bring value. Or to just to give you some use case example, the CDP can help you to really build and get a better understanding of of the affinities of your customers, where they spend their time on commerce, on the web, on app data. And if you combine this, let's say, unknown data with the known transactional data, we have seen great use cases where you can be able to personalize messaging and seen a huge impact on open and click rates, and then in the end on leads and conversions.
So in the process of writing a book at the minute about the interaction between data, creativity and ads, and interviewing people actually outside of the podcast about their experience with combining those things, and very much off the record, people are very cynical about the actual data that is being collected by some of the most famous marketing organizations in the world. The line is they're capturing names and email addresses, really. Like, that is the most easiest thing to capture and what is the most prominent. So do you have an opinion on that? Do you think, are they sensationalizing that? Or are you seeing there actually being rich data being captured in CDPs that is actually making a tangible difference?
I've seen both extremes. And I think it very much also depends on the industry, obviously, and on your business model. But I agree with you. I've seen both extremes. But I think the importance of rich, structured, and clean data is just accelerating. Of course, with the rise of AI, because my somehow hypothesis is at the end, and of course we don't know not know this yet, but my hypothesis is the model as such, and there are of course a few models out there, will not make the big difference. It's more the data the company's having to feed this model will make a huge difference. And there, of course, the CDP along other tools plays a crucial role. And I think that's, the importance is just accelerating again. And
how do you think the roles of the CDP will change based on the changes to the use of cookies online?
I mean, great question. I think where a couple of companies now struggling, and I think that's a little bit where the composable questions is coming from. How much data do I actually have in my data warehouse? Is the CDP not just creating another silo? How should they work together? Where should I do the heavy lifting? I'm building the scoring models and the machine learnings? And getting those two things together with having lesser and lesser data is, of course, a challenging question for a lot of companies.
So if someone's listening to this conversation thinking we need a new CDP or we need a CDP in the first place, what would you say are the common challenges that companies are facing when integrating a CDP into their existing tech stack? And what advice would you have for overcoming these obstacles?
I would relate, first of all, to the 4 points that I mentioned. Have a clear understanding of the data value proposition. Think early about governance and include your data protection early into the discussion. Be very conscious on the technology selection. Think about the target operating model. And one point we haven't talked about is then really scaling the solution. And I think it's a huge, depending, of course, on the size of the company, but I think you have somehow a team and a mechanism which is continuously doing proof of concept, testing new features, as Ray Dalio mentioned, try and learn, fail, and then hand this over and somehow cross the chasm between innovation and scalability and make this available for a certain amount of brands, for a certain amount of markets. And that's really where your CDP implementation then makes a difference, being able to do a lot of proof of concepts and being able to scale, because obviously innovation and scalability might be a little bit a balance to keep. Yeah? I would give you those answers, and operations, of course. At the end of the day, it might be a hygiene factor, but yeah, have a clear operations opportunity.
Well, unfortunately, we've come to the end of the podcast. I can't believe it. I feel like we've been talking for 5 minutes, but and I could definitely carry on talking for another hour. It's been fascinating. Thank you so much. If someone wanted to get in touch with you to talk about Ray Dalio or indeed CDPs, how would you like them to get in touch with you? Where is the best place to do that?
I think LinkedIn would be a fantastic opportunity for that.
Fantastic. Okay, well, look, thank you so much for your time. And please reach out to Constantin on LinkedIn.
Thanks, Tom, for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.